Hello, and welcome to week one of MLQ Replay. I'm Ethan Sturm alongside Nick Jablonski. We're here to break down all the action from what was an incredibly exciting week one here in Major League Quad Ball. In the end, it was three sweeps, but there's a lot to talk about and a lot of great action that took place. Nick, first week back, how did it feel to be back at it?
It's a grind every year, but it's a grind I'm more than happy to do. It's a great season. This was a great opening to the season. A lot of exciting stuff to talk about, Ethan.
Yeah, so let's get right into it. We're going to talk about each series individually. We're also going to have a guest on from a team in each series to talk about the game from the team perspective. So we're looking forward to that. If you've been with the show before, same format we've always done in the past. But I want to start with a general topic, Nick, before we kind of get into the individual teams. Obviously, rule changes are always going to be a big factor in this game. Two rule changes I kind of want to get into, because one I think did start to affect things almost immediately, and one I haven't necessarily kind of seen the full effect yet. So let's start with the one I think changed things a lot. Much like our preview show is titled, there are no resets this year in Major League Quad Ball. Ball goes back across the halfway line at any point or back across the keeper's own line at any point. It is a turnover. What did you see on the pitch in these three matches in terms of how that rule affected things?
I saw a lot of really exciting play. I thought that teams were not quite prepared on both offense and defense how to handle no resets properly. And it definitely led to a lot of turnovers in, we'll say, low pressure situations. Not a lot of long engaged situations where you normally see those turnovers from like the high press of beaters. They just started right away. And it made for a lot of really fun and enjoyable quad ball, really exciting matches. And it means that these teams are definitely going to have to all clean up how they execute.
Yeah, for sure. What I was seeing, I feel like, is that beaters were willing to kind of take opportunities to press that maybe you never see a beater take in a former scenario. So one thing that I can just think of off the top of my head from the New York-Washington series is at one point, I think it was New York's beaters were both loaded up on the right side of the field. Or maybe even in an interaction on the right side of the field. I think the maybe unarmed beater from Washington was making a wrap. The arm beater from Washington just took over be enough of a window if the team still had their reset. You would just be putting yourself out of position for no good reason. But caught the quad ball carrier off guard. Don't remember if it ended up in a turnover. I think it did. And I think kind of just speaks to the difference in the equation that I think these teams are going to be dealing with strategically this season.
Yeah, I think that teams are going to have to figure out how to use more of the field better. We still see a lot of carriers just come over the halfway line and just stop there like they could before, because if you ever got pushed over, it wasn't a reset and you were still fine to advance over. And now it's a completely different issue.
Right. Now on the defensive side, we talked about the good ways of being aggressive, but we also saw a lot of press breakdowns. And what were you kind of seeing in that regard, Nick?
Yeah, I think teams are sort of have an idea what they want to do. They weren't the most elegant press breaks, if you would. A lot of times it was just more defensive breakdowns than offensive ideas being the right thought process for it. But I think that we're going to see a lot of teams have to figure out how to play against one-on-one matchups a little bit better. We see teams. A lot of teams have been so risk averse in the past that when they see a one-on-one matchup, they don't necessarily take it. They're waiting for a 1-on-0 matchup with beater help. But now I think with presses, you're going to have to catch the ball in advantageous positions and then look to play against one-on-one matchups much better than in the past.
Yeah, see, I was actually kind of thinking more on the defensive side when it comes to these presses. With these beaters playing so high and all these chasers so used to seeing these 2-2s, what we're seeing a lot, I feel like, was double beater presses up to the midfield and then just a long pass into a back corner, just kind of tearing the press completely apart. And I think, a lot of these teams have only had a week or two with their full rosters, if even that, to work out some of these kinks. I think we'll see it cleaned up as the season goes on. But it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. The other rule that I think I almost kind of forgot existed at times this weekend was the addition of seeker swats this season. Honestly, like there was certain times where I felt like beaters were getting way too clean of a dominance, as they would in the old days, around a snitch, where you'd think a seeker could just kind of create some havoc there.
Yeah, I think part of that comes down to we're seeing a lot of seekers play with beater pairs they've never played with before, or they haven't played with in a long time, and so much of that flag runner on pitch information is built around knowing when your seeker is going to go, communicating between seekers and beaters, and that tends to come with time or with a clear set of rules. And like you said, these teams have been together for maybe a week, maybe two. I don't think that they've necessarily set out their flag runner on pitch strategy as well. I mean, it's something up in Boston that they've run for years, ever since you and I both played. There were clear sets defined and clear understandings, and I think that that's due to the consistency of that program. But these programs are going to have to figure something out along that line.
For sure. So just some housekeeping before we get into the individual series. I just want to take a second to shout out our Patreon, which has some absolutely awesome content already rolling out for the 2023 season. Cuts by Neves is following the day-to-day of the Chicago Prowl, our newest franchise, as well as the day-to-day in Neves' life. He just graduated in the most recent episode. There's 2 episodes out already. There'll be episodes coming out all summer long. And on Thursday, we'll be introducing The Breakdown, which will be a show more focused on the very niche, nitpicky parts of strategy in the sport than this show. Obviously, this show is a bit more of a broad spectrum kind of view of the sport. So, yeah, we hope you check out the Patreon. There's going to be more and more content coming as the season goes on. But with that said, let's not take any longer. Let's get into the season and the series. We're going to start in the East Division with our series of the week. New York traveled to Washington. It was a rematch of last season's opening day in New York, where New York took the series 2-1. This time, New York manages the 3-0 sweep. An absolutely insane game one that had both teams on match point for probably 4 or 5 minutes real time. New York won that 161-55. And then 2 more comfortable wins after that, a 165-60 win and a 135-40 win. Nick, I think there's only one real place to start, and this kind of shows based both on what we saw on pitch, and I feel like what the stats are showing. It was just a dominant beater performance from New York.
Yeah, I think that New York looked comfortable out on the pitch at all times. We didn't really see a huge dodgeball control situation for Washington. It seemed like every time they got it, they lost it on the next possession. And Devin Lee especially was just doing whatever he wanted on the field.
Yeah, Devin Lee took the USQ season off. We haven't seen him since last summer. And, I mean, he was just absolutely explosive out there. Was covering the entire pitch, was doing whatever he wanted. And what you saw was kind of at some point, he just seemed to kind of suck the will out of the Washington Beaters. And what I mean by that is at some point, Washington Beaters were just throwing 5-10 yard beats at him. And you're just never going to beat Devin Lee like that. He's just going to get low and make the block every single time. And it seemed to demoralize the team. And I mean, obviously it wasn't just Devin. It was a really strong performance across the board. It shows up in the stats, just the sheer level of budget control from everybody, from Tate K, from Tessa Mullins, from Jason Ing. Everybody who they put out on that pitch was performing. And like you said, when Washington would get budget control for a stretch here and there, they'd be able to make something of it. It just would never last very long.
Yeah, I think this is a team that we'll talk about a little bit about the physicality of this series in a moment. But this is a team that's going to thrive off of being able to take their time to set up or to have clear fast break opportunities. Those sort of half transition opportunities, they tended to struggle with a little bit. They tended to sort of get into this chaotic, not necessarily clear what the next step was offensive option. And thanks to New York's dodgeball dominance, they were able to take on, force them into a lot of those half transition situations.
Yeah. But I mean, obviously, given all of that, the score lines don't, speak to anything crazy. +4 in the Quaffle game in game 1, +7 in the Quaffle game in game 2, and +6 in the Quaffle game in game 3. So why do you think there was somewhat of a, non sequitur between the score lines and the absolute dominance we were seeing in the beater game?
I think that Washington's quad ball core is a phenomenal core. I think that they sort of settled in as it went along, even with the injury to their star keeper, Tyler Trudeau, that seemed to hobble him late in game one, significantly in game two, and almost kept him entirely out of game three. I think that there's a team that is going to be able to get back in transition and play defense with zero dodgeballs. We saw that time and time again. There were goal-saving tackles right by the hoops, or they would force New York into what should be easier shots, but New York was just missing them due to the pressure of the point chasers or the hoops defenders. I think that that's the case, and I think that this is a team that also wants to push the pace, and that can definitely lead to some tired players on the field, which is why they were cycling so aggressively through their lines in the first game especially, whereas New York, I think, tended to play a little bit longer into their lines.
Yeah, and you talk about the Trudeau injury, and Riley Starrs also picked up an early knock for Washington. Did play out the whole rest of the series, but and it does speak to kind of the depth of this team, the way they were able to roll out all these players. Some of these younger names that making a show of things are names that we're familiar with. I feel like everyone is, like players like TJ Jennerett, a player like Zan Zadiki, who's had a big year for the UVA program. But it's everybody. Shane McConaughey had a great series for Washington. In that first game, made a couple of the huge stops in open field that kind of kept things alive, was getting his goals, when he could. And this is a player out of the Virginia Tech program, a player that I don't think a ton of people are familiar with. But that's just kind of the next player up mentality that we saw from this Washington team all weekend long. And I think it's why they were able to hang. That said, I think when it kind of came down to those big moments, there were a few more sure things on the New York side, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I think that you have a theory, but I think that New York in general had more consistent scoring options throughout the entire series, whereas Washington was doing a lot of really, really cool and super athletic things throughout, but they all looked hard. If you go and listen back to what we talked about on the broadcast, everything Washington did was difficult. They were executing highly difficult things to do. They were playing in tough to play in situations, whereas New York seemed to have a couple of things they could always go back to get a bucket, if you would.
Yeah, and this is the cheat code theory I was playing with earlier this week, which is to say that right now, in an elite level game where every single player is going to make all of their hits, which is what I think we would agree we saw in this series. I mean, both no matter who was out on the field in the qualifying game in this series, they were making their hits. The kind of the specific ways your team can just guarantee they're going to get a few points really adds up to kind of make the difference in series like this. So, John Jackson's no budget play is a cheat code. I mean, he's the only person who is getting through those no budget situations on the field in this series. The way this team was able to play Leo Freed above the hoops throughout the series was a cheat code. Thinking about other teams, the way Jay Stewart can just get into the lane and hit his shots, that's a cheat code. San Antonio is always going to get those points. And this Washington team just didn't have cheat codes this weekend. And like you said, everything seemed hard. I think if anything, it was Rachel Hield's distribution was the closest thing they had to a cheat code, but every other goal just had to be worked so hard. It had to be a New York breakdown, or it had to be 3 perfectly timed passes. And Washington had like the 2 passes a lot of the time. They just didn't have the 3 passes. And, maybe a healthy Tyler Trudeau in those no budget situations is a bit more of a cheat code. But they just kind of need to find those go-to ways to score goals. You feel like this Washington team has had those ways in the past, but they just didn't have them this weekend.
Yeah, I think this Washington team, even though everyone knows two-handed tackling now, a lot of their players were definitely more viable in the one-handed tackling or the early two-handed tackling era. And I think that there's going to have to be that push to find that third pass or to make that pass just before contact. A lot of passes are coming late after contact, which is difficult to do regardless of your ability to drive through players. And that's a thing I think they'll look back at the film, they'll see. I also think that their beater chaser synchronization was really off. A lot of we talked about the demoralization that the beater core definitely felt. We could see throughout the games, but that led to a lot of either early engages or really late engages. And if your quad ball core is not going to go with you, or you're not going to go with your quad ball core, you're in for a bad time a lot of the times, because both sides can just focus independently on the defensive end. And that definitely led to a lot of these more difficult situations for this Washington team.
For sure. And then on the other side, we knew coming into the series that New York was going to be without Lindsey Morella. And we said in the pregame that Molly Potter was going to have to step up. Molly Potter stepped up in a huge way in this series. Do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, we always knew Molly Potter is an offensive threat, and she was absolutely that this series, hitting a ton of mid-range shots, catching the defense off guard from all places on the field, staying very composed with some big players bearing down on her, and constantly making that pass up to safety or to a cutting chaser. But defensively, she stepped up huge. A lot of goal-saving wraps and grabs around the hoops to just strip the ball or to hold the ball back for a half second so that her beater could come in and engage. And not letting bigger players bully her around the hoops. There were no post-up opportunities. I think there were a couple of times where Washington went for post-up opportunities, and Molly Potter did the absolute right thing in playing the ball and not playing the player and breaking up the pass just enough some of those times in order for it to be tipped out of the hands of that Washington player. And that's so smart and such a great understanding of how to play the position.
Yeah, looking at the stat line, I mean, the 4 goals and 3 assists, that's just Molly Potter getting hers. That's what we're expecting. But those 3 stops, which might have honestly been an undersell, because I don't know what happens if someone gets a deflection in and then someone else falls on the loose ball. I don't know who gets the credit. But like you said, getting those hands in, because we both focused when we were prepping for the series on New York's Boston series last year, where Boston kind of isolated Potter at times and kind of took advantage of that on defense. Potter was not letting that happen this week against Washington. Huge series for her. Any last note you want to make before we jump to our interview?
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to just make this note that, like, while Washington came out of this 0-3, this team is still, this is the same thing that happened last year. This is the team that went 0-3 at the beginning of the season and continued to push back on the quarterfinal side and took Austin to a game 3. This team has some stuff to figure out, but I definitely think it has the players to do that and continue to be a top echelon team.
Yeah, and obviously I think their ultimate goal, and talking to them, I think this is clear, they need to be a top 2 team. They understand what happened finishing 3rd in the division last year and how much that hurt them come championship weekend. They're probably going to focus their whole season now on this Boston series, which is going to come very late in the season. And depending on what happens in New York, Boston could be a very, very big series. But yeah, so let's jump into our first interview. We're going to bring on from the New York Titans, beater and seeker, Jason Ng. Jason, thanks for taking the time tonight.
No, thank you for having me, Ethan and Nick.
Awesome.
Great to be here.
Awesome. So the first thing I want to talk about, you might have heard us talking a little bit about teams, really kind of having to rush together. There not being that many weeks before this week 1 slate. Talk a little bit about, how this team's come together, how difficult it's been to kind of readjust, especially in the beater game. Because, I mean, you're basically coming together with a bunch of people. You haven't been playing with all USQ. So is Tessa. So is Devin, because Devin wasn't playing. So how's that kind of been all working over the last few weeks?
I mean, yeah, we all showed to practice, and we all have experience from last year with the Titans. But I think getting practice, getting reps in, and having fun that's how you grow the chemistry together. And whether or not it's like you teaching, getting harsh words out there, or at practice, or having fun, like I said before, it's really the chemistry you build during practice. And you beaters, we really like to talk about what we're doing. And if we don't see something right, then we'll usually get together and talk about, hey, why are we doing this? And why are we doing this? How are we doing this? And how can we do it better? So I think that, well, we haven't had many practices, I think, along extended practices and other weekday practices. It definitely gets us going together as a team. And from last year, like last summer during MLQ, some of us have played together before, and sometimes we just get in the groove of each other. We all know how each other play, so we try and play off of one another.
Awesome. So going into the series, game 1, Washington was just kind of throwing those super, super short beater shifts at you guys, and was just kind of playing super high energy and just very, very aggressively. Did that take you guys all by surprise, and how did you guys kind of adjust to that as the day went on?
Personally, I thought it was smart. I mean, you get your subs in, you get your reps in, and you give 110% every time you can. And once you're gassed, you go for a sub. But I personally didn't notice it. I just played my game as much as I could. I knew I have to do my part, and I think the same happened with my team. My beater partners: Tate, Tessa, Christian. I could name everybody, but I think everybody played their game normally and how they would. Whether them mixing it up, short shifts, doesn't matter. You really adapt to the play style as beaters. So I think we all know that, but you give what's taken to you, and you just adapt.
Awesome. We obviously are talking about the new no reset rule, and we saw some pretty high presses broken out by both teams, but especially by you guys and your beaters. How has the preparation kind of gone with the new rule set over the last few weeks, and do you feel like you guys have been preparing any differently in terms of what you're looking to do out there?
We definitely know that with the new no reset rule, I should say, that you're allowed to be a little, or there's a more of a benefit to being more aggressive on the pitch. And we know that our beaters are very strong, our core is very strong, and we do have a lot of depth in our team. So we know that we can press and we can be a little more aggressive to force those turnovers, to take especially when we have control a lot of the time, we can take one of their beaters out and force a press situation. So I think that with the new reset rule, it's working on it at practice and learning during the game to see that maybe we can catch the other team off guard. Especially, I think that's what we did in this series. We definitely caught Washington off guard a bit, and we kept throwing it at them until they could figure it out. So
down the stretch in game one, when the goals just weren't falling and the game just kind of kept extending. I know I've been on those sidelines when that kind of thing happens, and you just start feeling a little bit helpless out there. So, what was kind of the vibe on the sideline as that just kept going and going and going?
Me, I definitely was getting a little nervous. I mean, who wouldn't? It's a 1-goal game for 4 or 5 minutes of game time, however long it was. But the sideline, we always kept trying to give each other suggestions, trying to get through it. Like, let's slow down, let's play the game at our pace, and we tried not to panic as much as we could. And we again try not to change it up. We wanted to play our game, like we said, make those constant subs. As if you're tired, you get off, sub, go back on, as much as you could. But the sideline, I mean, is definitely very, very tense. But as you can see, we picked ourselves up and we just got the job done.
Hey, Jason. So Ethan talked a little bit about this idea of a cheat code theory. Like, you have all these scoring options. Coming from a team like Rutgers, where it's much more of a team-oriented game, in that there's not really one leading. I guess your brother, Byron, kind of, but not so much. It's much more team-oriented. What's it like to see the adjustment to coming to a team here where you do know you have these kind of players who you can just turn to and say, we need one right now? Like, John, you have to go get this right now, or we got to throw it up to Leo, or give Molly a chance at a mid-range shot.
Mm-hmm. Well, I definitely agree. Like, Rutgers, we are very team organized, and we like to play as a team. But knowing that in MLQ this season, you got more experienced players who are willing to go through all the contact possible to do what they need to do to get the job done. I mean, you sort of still want to play as a team a little bit, and you still want to play together and not just sometimes, John Jackson, like you said, hero ball it. That's Molly, take a shot, Leo, get from behind. But sometimes you do need to hero ball it, but whatever works. If you can get that goal by any means necessary, whether it's hero ball or team ball, you get the job done. That's all that matters.
Jason, something we haven't mentioned yet is your 2 grabs on the weekend. 2 pretty quick ones on John Smutney, who's a well-regarded flag runner. Obviously, in the college game, you end up playing a lot of minutes, and sometimes don't even get the opportunity to get in at Seeker. Are you kind of feeling in the zone more now at Seeking because, you can actually rest up for a few minutes before you get in there with the yellow headband? And kind of what's the different mentality of when you're trying to seek occasionally at Rutgers versus the ability to seek on the Titans?
I definitely, yeah. Playing time definitely takes into account. When I'm at Rutgers, I do play a lot. I like to give myself that. And then coming out, I got to come straight out of the beater game and go into seeking. And sometimes it's a stretch. You can't watch the snitch because you're first in. You can't memorize all the moves. You can't see what you want to do. But when I come here, I know I have more time to breathe, and I know I have more time to analyze like what the snitch is doing, how the other beaters are playing. So I sort of analyze, like I said. But Rutgers, again, very fast paced and a lot going through my mind. I feel like I want to lead this team to the best of my ability. But when I'm here in MLQ with Titans, I know I got good beaters behind my back, like more experienced beaters that can allow me time for the snitch too. So
Awesome. Last question, just kind of more broad one for this Titans season. Talking to Frank and talking to the team last year, not that it was a full-on rebuild. I mean, obviously you guys made the semifinals and took a game off Austin, but it was a year where you guys were a very young team. A lot of players kind of playing their first MLQ seasons. Frank really prioritized, getting the whole roster, a lot of play time. Have the expectations shifted at all this year? I mean, you're obviously very high regard. You have a bunch of people who've either been called up to Team USA or the Team USA DA. A bunch of people just won USQ titles. So do you feel a difference in expectations for this season, or are you guys just in the same way, just kind of taking it one day at a time?
I think we'd say more one at a time. Definitely, like we all want to do we all want to do whatever it is the team needs. And personally, I know last year, it was my first MLQ experience, and I just want to help out the team however much I could, do what's needed to get done to win the game, whether that's cheering from the sidelines or not playing or being rostered and not playing at all. But now I feel it's the same mentality. Me personally, I again just want to help the team the best I can, and I think that goes for everybody on the Titans right now. USNT, the DA too. That's for later, but right now is what we have in our hands. And again, we just want to do what's best for the team, play as a team, and hopefully that can take us there.
Awesome. And I gotta know, are you hoping for a prowl matchup at Champs so you can beat Byron?
Definitely. I'm looking just grab the ball, run straight towards him, and make him run, get a reset maybe. I'm very excited to play against him.
Awesome. All right. Well, Jason, thanks so much for taking the time, and best of luck with the rest of your season.
Thank you for having me. Have a good one.
Awesome. No problem. All right. So we're going to jump to the North Division, the other opening series of the weekend with San Antonio happening a little later. Much like in the other series, first game was a tight one, with Toronto eventually winning 120-100 after falling behind early to this Cleveland squad. And then the next two games, again, much like the other series, a little bit more comfortable, a 140-70 win for Toronto, and then 175-50 win for Toronto to complete the sweep. Nick, I think a lot of people coming in were predicting a Toronto sweep, but obviously Cleveland gave them a run for their money, at least in game one, and I'd say overall maybe a little bit more than people were expecting. So did this surprise you at all, kind of the results, as it were?
I'd say no. I mean, I think the additions of Jack Mosley and Joe Lombardi and Fiona Gaffney were huge contributors to Cleveland team ceiling is as a whole. And I think Toronto may have taken a step backward this year in general. I think that we talked about it earlier on No Resets, this real lack of ball carrying identity, especially in a world with no resets, is going to create some of these closer games. They're constantly going to be on upset alert, I think. And this Cleveland team proved it. They came out and gave their best shot in game one, which is where you want to do. You want to try and get game one, get all that momentum going in your direction. It wasn't to be this time, and they dropped off a little bit from there, but not much, I don't think.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about it, these additions, and I do think they're a lot of the story. You look at the team stats, Brechting leading the team with 4 goals, the veteran of the team, but then Mosley and Gaffney right behind him, 3 apiece. And then the assist category, Lombardi, 7 assists led the team, and I think had the only positive assist to turnover ratio on the team. And sometimes it's the benefits of just having players who've been in those big situations. This Cleveland team's young. Even coaching staff, even what you call veteran player, is pretty young. With Gaffigan no longer with the team, wanted to stop getting injured in practice and not being able to play for the team this weekend. So not even necessarily veteran people, but people have just been in those situations. We're going to talk about the San Antonio team. It's not necessarily a lot of veterans, but it's a lot of people who played in the big games. Jack Mosley and Joe Lombardi kind of bring some of that experience to the squad.
Yeah, I mean, a thing we talk about, Ethan, is you have to learn how to win. It's not necessarily that, especially in these close game situations, you have to learn what it feels like to be in those situations and how to adjust from that. And then you can't really practice it. You can simulate it all you want, but I mean, we were for Washington, New York, both sidelines looked scared out of their minds for that last goal scenario. And no matter what you do, that's just what it's going to be. The only thing that gets you to be calm in that situation is that experience. And this Cleveland team, maybe they lost game one, but they're learning how to get into that scenario in a really great way. And it's really exciting to see from a team that's definitely on the upswing.
Yeah, and when you kind of really break it down, I think Cleveland came out great, and they really kind of brought the fire. And I think over the course of the day, two things really kind of made the difference. The first was kind of bludger control, and just it not being a very even battle in the beater game. What were you kind of seeing there across the board?
I mean, there's a lot of veteran beaters on this Toronto team. We down here in America don't necessarily talk about them a lot throughout, but last year even we saw them come out and be a consistently strong beating core for this team last year, and that definitely carried over this year. I mean, only one Toronto beater averaged under 1.5 dodgeballs, which just shows the control dominance that this team asserted in this weekend. They may struggle against some of the more elite beating cores, but luckily for them, I think this eastern side of the North Division is going to have a lot of young beating cores for them to work against.
Yeah, and I mean, yes, it is a veteran core, but I feel like it disappointed us at times last summer, especially at North Division championships. And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. The most exciting thing for me was to kind of see a big breakout performance from Piotr MLQ, who has been with the team, but I feel like was never necessarily a standout. +9 in the plus minus on the weekend. That was tied for the best in the league. On average, 1.7 dodgeballs in his team's control on possessions he was in the game for. We've been kind of talking. It's almost become a running joke, and we joked with the coach about Zach McDonald being on these teams' 30 rosters, but never actually being in these 21s, and how we've been kind of waiting for Zach McDonald. But if Piotr can play like this against some of these really talented teams as they go deeper and deeper in the North Division schedule, obviously this Cleveland group a little bit on the younger side when it comes to their beating talent, it could be a big opportunity for this team.
Yeah, and he did all of that on only 27 beater shifts played. We have some of our players we've talked about or we're going to talk about who go up into the high 30s. We have one out there with 50. I think that this being done on only 27 speaks volumes to his play over the weekend.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that the test is really going to come in Rochester. I mean, they've got some talented and some importantly veteran beaters. I mean, a player like Josh Kramer coming back onto the roster and whatnot. So I think that will be the real test for this beater core. And then the other thing that I think kind of made the difference when all was said and done was kind of the physicality. It was that Toronto could make a stop and make the tackle when it came down to, the occasional time when their beaters would end up unarmed and unable to defend. And then on the other side, players like Brian Melchior or Steven Dua were just kind of pretty comfortably able to get to the hoop at will when they really needed to.
Yeah, this is something that we talked about last year, right? Toronto kind of had to figure out the two-handed tackling meta and what happens there, and them coming out and playing against Rochester so early in the season, a team that is so comfortable with physicality. It really showed their struggle on that side of the ball, and it seems like they've definitely worked hard to get up to speed and continue to carry that through this year.
Yeah. And then obviously just the one grab in the Seeker game when all is said and done. We've kind of seen Derek Parker dominating the North Division as a flag runner for a while now. But, obviously kind of hoping to see a little bit more of something. We were kind of high on the Toronto, I feel like, Seeking game towards the end of last year, but obviously only the one grab this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is we've talked about this in general, the North Division as a whole. There's a lot of questions at Seeker, and Toronto's not exempt from that at all. And I think that's going to be an interesting thing, especially in these closer games. I mean, if Toronto gets the grab in game one, we're talking about it completely differently. I mean, yeah, and if Cleveland gets the grab in game one against them, it's a completely different story. I think that's something that they definitely need to look into. But a lot of teams need to look into that. I mean, even though we can go back to the East Series for 1 second, TJ Jenner gets 2 seconds, pulls the flag runner in game one. And New York needs to realize they can't afford to give that up. And the same thing the other way. Washington gave them a lot of time. And I think that's the case here is there needs to be some semblance of consistency with this Toronto Seeking core rather than just we get the grab in game threes, which we saw last year and into this year.
Yeah. And obviously like a lot of these teams, even not the Canadian of it all, but, even within USQ, you go big regional tournaments, you're facing, or even you go to nationals, you're facing a lot of flag runners that are just, the flag runner volunteer from one of the teams at the tournament. Basically, that's a lot different than the Parkers, the Smutneys, kind of coming in and doing all of your games, and it kind of does separate the real talented Seekers. And like you said, generating both big weekends for them, and we're going to need to see that over here as well. Any last notes before we jump into our interview for the weekend?
No, I don't think so.
Awesome. All right. So we're going to bring on the head coach of the Toronto Raiders, Michael Howard. Howie, how you doing tonight?
Great. Glad to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
No problem. So Howie, you weren't at the series this weekend, which I feel like you, as someone who really likes to tinker, I feel like on the field was probably a little bit hard. So talk about the experience from your end of coaching this team from afar.
Yeah, one of our practice squad players was actually getting married on Saturday, and myself and a few other members of the team were invited to the wedding. So we weren't able to be there. I don't know if I've ever been so stressed while coaching a game or while watching a game, just not being able to be there to make any adjustments. I was very thankful that we had a lot of veteran leadership around. I knew we were in good hands. My assistant coaches, Savannah Campbell and Brian Melchior, are phenomenal. We have a couple of great leaders on the team in Stevie Vindua and Corey Smithson, who also stepped up to help. A very, very stressful experience watching the stream from when I was getting ready and just trying my best between games to call the team, give a couple words of encouragement, try and be the eye in the sky coach as best I could.
So obviously, even beyond this week not being there, you're in a non-playing coach position this season. So what made you decide to make that transition? Was it a difficult transition for you at all?
Yeah, I suffered another concussion during the Quad Ball Canada season back in the fall. And while I'm working, I'm also doing a master's part-time. Decided to take some of the time to make sure that everything was going to be okay health-wise. And one of the ways I'm doing that is sort of taking a little bit of a step back from the playing. It's tough. I won't lie. I miss playing a lot. Being at practice is a nice way to stay connected to the game, but the transition was a little bit harder than I thought it was going to be. With the QC season ending in December with our nationals and having sort of that time off that everybody was off for us, it didn't really hit me during the winter months. But then coming back to tryouts and practices and into this series, I really miss playing.
Yeah, but hey, this is a pro brain health podcast, so we appreciate you making the responsible decisions with all of that. Kind of going into between these two seasons, because we don't necessarily get a chance to talk to all the teams after the season, kind of get that kind of brain dump. So were you guys generally okay with where you felt at the end of last season, a little bit disappointed with where you felt at the end of last season, and kind of what were your kind of goals coming into this season, maybe hoping to improve on?
I think we had some positive takeaways from last season and some areas that we know we could have done a bit better in. I think going into some of our series last year, like the Rochester, not being able to keep up there, losing games to Indy, now Chicago, both at North Championships and close, but not quite at MLQ Championships. We knew that we could have been a bit better in some of those games. But I think our goals last year were to qualify for championships, and that's the first time this team has won a game at championships. I think that's the first time a Canadian team had ever won a game at MLQ Championships, actually. So there's a lot of a huge positive to take away there for us, and it's a great growth point for us coming into this season. We've got a full 30-person active roster. We have a non-playing coach. We have a full 18-person practice squad. So we're really trying to like foster growth and development of the program. And we've got our eye on that Rochester series as a little bit of a revenge tour for us for this year as well.
For sure. So I'm probably going to ask this to everybody on this pod, but entire preparations in terms of the rules and specifically the no reset, how has that kind of affected your preparations for the season, maybe strategically as a team?
Yeah, the funny thing for us actually is that QC had a no reset rule for our 2021 season. It only lasted a couple months that season, but we all got a little bit of a taste for it before it went away again this past year. And I know you had mentioned some of the seeker swatting stuff on the preamble in this show. We actually have that as a rule in QC as well. So some of these are a bit more familiar to us. I think what you had seen from like a lot of the series this weekend, including ours, is like we weren't quite fully ready to implement, some of these more aggressive defenses to be able to, really take advantage of that no resets being allowed. And it's something that we're starting to work on, and we're going to just continue to sort of smooth out as we head over the next month before our next series.
Awesome. Nick, we're going to say
Yeah. Hey, Howie. Did Cleveland surprise you all at all, or was it really more just like you all sort of shaking off some rust? You talked about it being a couple months off since before, or can you talk about more of the Cleveland side of things?
Yeah, I would say it was a little bit of both for us. Like I think you can look at Cleveland's record and see that there's not a lot of wins there over the last little while, but the reality is that this is still a great team and this is a great league. Like you don't get to walk through any team in any division. Like there are great players on all those teams that are going to give you a fight. And I think we might have looked a little bit past them, and that was our mistake, and it took us a little bit to correct that. And obviously we knew that they had lost some bigger players from their previous seasons, but they made some big pickups that we were familiar with, who were playing very well against us when they were in Rochester last year. So I mean, it's a full credit to their team. They clearly have taken a step up, and it's great to see.
Speaking of taking steps up, we kind of mentioned the really impressive performance from Piotr Miku this weekend. Is that something you guys have kind of seen coming in practice, or kind of a standout performance overall from
him? I've known Piotr for a long time, and we've been teammates for a while. I think when he's on, he can be the best beater in Canada. I think for him, it's just consistently putting it together from one game to the next. I think this performance that you saw at this past weekend series is just a glimpse into what you could, see from him for the rest of the season and going forwards.
Awesome. So, you kind of clearly had very clearly set goals for last season. So what are you kind of what would you consider a successful season for the Toronto Raiders in 2023?
We'd love to qualify to the quarterfinals of MLQ Championships, whether that is through a path that takes us to the top of the east side of the North Division after playing against Rochester and then into the North Championships, or if we have to play through those double elimination games again, we believe that we're a team that can get there, and once we're in the quarters, anything can happen.
Awesome. All right. Well, Howie, thanks so much for taking the time tonight. Best of luck for Toronto for the season. We'll be looking forward to that Rochester series for sure.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. All right, so let's move on to our last series of the night, which, as we mentioned, was also a sweep, but once again, a series with a mix of closely contentious and less so games. San Antonio completing the sweep with a 195-110 win in game one, a 170-140 win in game two that really could have gone any way. Kansas City went into the 20-minute timeout leading, and I believe had two different catches called off, either one of which would have hypothetically won the game if it had been good. But San Antonio wins just through call for points scored. And then San Antonio winning 165-80, officially getting their revenge for their loss to Kansas City in Kansas City a year ago. Nick, we were talking before these series started. We were expecting a very close series, and I think in some ways you could argue we got one, but in some ways we definitely did not. So, what if anything kind of took you by surprise about the play on the field this weekend?
I definitely think that I was excited to see Kansas City bringing a full roster and traveling really, really well this weekend, and it definitely showed. I think that this is a team that in the past, when they've brought more limited rosters, is able to give that one game sort of attempt and then sort of peter out in games 2 and 3. But this time they were consistently through all 3 games, maybe not quite to the level of the San Antonio team. And I think that the San Antonio team definitely answered some questions we had across how they were going to handle this MLQ level competition, given how much of their veteran core has departed, either retiring or from MLQ or for other teams. I think that it was really exciting to see that the big game experience that this young UTSA core has seen in USQ is starting to carry over to MLQ in a great way.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, if I agree, I think there were questions because they were a young team about the San Antonio squad. And I feel like we just kind of got a resounding yes, like everywhere up and down the roster, right? I mean, at the star level, I mean, Jay, is always going to get Jays. And I think he did in a big way. 12 goals and 4 assists on 2 turnovers is an insane stat line. But, other players that, we weren't sure. David Avila, a player playing, D2 in Texas State that a lot of people have been high on, has a huge weekend as well, 7 goals, 6 assists. This team played a lot of 2 male in the beater game, and that necessitated huge weekends from a lot of their female chasers. Really good play from Alyssa Viaba. Really good play from Malena Sosa. Really good play from Catherine Hay. And, that's the only way that this team was going to be able to compete. And then obviously, I mean, they have some veterans as well. And all of them, if there was any rust, they shook it off. We hadn't seen Luke Langley in a while. He had a pretty good weekend. Dylan Freeman is always going to get his, when we're talking about cheat codes and no budget situations, Dylan Freeman's definitely one of those. So it just felt like, especially in the Quaffle game, they got exactly what they needed from every single player.
Yeah, I think this is a team that we had not necessarily questions in the quad ball game so much as in the beater game, and they were able to hang throughout their depth through their beating core, which was an exciting thing to see. I think that this is a team that when push came to shove against KC, they got the better of that matchup a little bit more throughout that core. Not by much, but it was definitely enough to let this quad ball core take advantage of some of the mismatches they saw.
For sure, yeah. It was an interesting situation because I think San Antonio was starting Chris De La Fuente, and KC was often starting Reyes and KJ, who obviously had a really big season for Mizzou this year. And it kind of felt like on both sides that the players who have some club experience, some veteran experience, specifically in the beater game, were just able to make a few more plays. And I think De La Fuente had one of the best weekends of any beater in the country. Plus 9 on plus minus, had 5 stops to his name as well. Very, very far above 1 in average dodgeballs controlled. But then on the other side, I thought Justin DeWick was probably the most consistent beater over there. And, obviously Vincent Reyes head coaching for the first time. Everyone talks about how playing head coach always kind of saps you a little bit to some degree. But it felt like the KJ DeWick line was having a better time. It felt like when De La Fuente was on the field, San Antonio was having its best times. And, obviously both these beater cores are very young. So it'll be interesting to see as they have to go up against a, Austin beater core, which, let's be honest, everyone's going to struggle against what that Austin beater core is bringing, but how they'll make the adjustments when it comes to that.
Yeah, I think this was a game of waves. I think San Antonio would start out early and get their runs and set it up, and then KC would come back and make a couple of runs on the backside of that. And I think part of that too is Sena Morimoto coming off the bench for this team really provided a consistent scoring and passing opportunity for this team. Was one of the few players that seemed like who was really willing to drive through that front two of the San Antonio defense.
Yeah, so Sena Morimoto was playing an incredibly unselfish game. I think Daniel Williams, who was the announcer, kind of even commented on some point. And I don't know if that's, a mix of playing on a team like the Warriors, who is a pass-heavy team, plus, being a coach for the, this year for Creighton, kind of getting that outlook as well. But really was running the offense so nicely. 8 assists, 3 turnovers, one of the better assist-turnover ratios on the weekend for anybody, and added 5 goals to that as well. And that kind of allowed some of their younger players some space to cook. Riley Usami from that Creighton program with 5 goals, Bitsy Archibald with 4 goals. So it felt like, kind of like you said, that second line was producing a lot of the points for this KC team, even if it wasn't necessarily enough ever against this San Antonio side. But yeah, the other thing about the series that a little bit, I would say, if warning signs for anything, is that when you're talking about elite teams, because obviously these teams are expected to beat a lot of these maybe weaker teams in MLQ, but when you're seeing how they stack up against elite teams, we were talking about how in that Washington New York series, everyone was always going to make their tackle in a one-on-one, and I would say on both sides there were definitely some concerns for me about that, kind of watching these two teams play.
Yeah, I think if anything, this makes me so excited for the rest of their matchups against the South Division across the board. We talk about maybe this consolidation of talent into this Austin team, but what it does is it makes the rest of this division super exciting. And to see how they match up against this Austin team, but mostly how they match up against each other. I'm super excited to see what these teams tend to do. We tended to not see the consistency of defense that we saw maybe in the East Division to open this, but that's going to be, I think, consistent across the bottom 4 teams of this division, or the 4 teams not named Austin. And I'm super excited to see how they play against each other and what the changes they make and how they adjust going on throughout this year.
Yeah, because like you said, and we talked about this some in the Washington New York series, at times this game looked like chaos. And I don't know if it was the rule change, if it was teams just getting used to it, but just in the same way the Washington New York series sometimes devolved into chaos, it was just, I think somebody made the joke on AQD when the camera at Washington, New York couldn't keep up with the play anymore. Gave the warning. It was kind of that back and forth style, and I think all these teams are still kind of figuring out the strategies that are going to work for them. They are piecing together. Obviously, the San Antonio team has a lot of players from the UTSA program, but even so, they're bringing a lot of players to play alongside them, and it'll be interesting to see, like you said, how these games develop, because we know New Orleans is going to be very strategic in the way they approach it. We know League City is not going to be a pushover either, so it's going to be a fun division to watch it play out.
Yeah, I'm very. I know I keep saying it, but I am genuinely so excited to see how this division plays out. There's going to be a lot of fun games, regardless of the records at the end of the year. I think any of these 4 teams could take games off of each other without any question.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to jump into our last interview of the night, talking with assistant coach, chaser, and beater for the San Antonio Soldados, Malena Sosa. Malena, thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, thank you for inviting me to be on.
Of course. So I want to start by kind of talking about momentum, because obviously a ton of your team comes from this UTSA program. You guys are obviously coming off a great win a month ago at USQ Championships. So kind of, were you able to kind of bring that in to kind of be on that high of, we don't lose games right now, and just kind of take that same kind of intensity into this Kansas City series?
I think for sure, and I think that intensity definitely spread to the veteran players on our team and players that come from other colleges like Texas State. I think it just makes it made the warm-ups and the time between games just feel very hype. Even practices leading up to the KC series, I mean, all of us, we just felt like this level of confidence and sureness in ourselves and our playing abilities that we felt very good about going into the KC series, especially the UTSA players.
Awesome. So kind of talking about that confidence in yourselves, because, when you really think of, and we've talked about this a few times, I think, on the show, those situations where it's coming down to the wire and things almost feel like they're getting a little out of control. And obviously, I feel like a couple times last year, both on the USQ side, you think about your Rutgers game at Nationals, and then also this KC series a year ago, sometimes those situations didn't go your way. And now thinking about like game 2 of this series, some of your games at Nationals, it feels like you guys it's going more your way. Do you guys feel like kind of the experience you've gained over the last couple of years is changing how you're coming into these types of situations?
I think so, because I think having experience in chaotic situations definitely helps us realize like what we need to do to reel us back in and to get back on track, or how to keep our heads as level as possible, especially like in game 2 when the score was really close. I know tensions are very high on the bench, but I think those of us that had experience in chaotic situations before just knew how to keep the team as calm as possible and reel them back in to kind of focus on the game in front of us.
Awesome. And so I have asked this to everybody. So how have you guys kind of taken the approach of the no reset rule, and kind of how that would affect any preparation you guys are doing offensively, defensively, etc.?
I think in practices, like in half court or in scrimmages, it's really just about not letting play continue for the sake of practice, just getting used to that hard boundary. Similar to what we did last year when the keeper line became a hard boundary. And I think in terms of our defense, I think a little bit of this happened during the KC series. It gives defenses like a big opportunity for press situations to lead to turnovers. And I think that's a really cool thing to see, and to be able to get out of press situations instead of just a reset, being able to get a turnover. So, yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Malena.
Hi.
We talk a lot about the young core of this team, but this team added back some veteran players, namely Dylan Freeman, Luke Langlanet, and Chris De La Fuente. Can you maybe talk to how you're integrating those players, or what they bring, if it's anything different? Maybe they calm down sort of the younger players in these high pressure situations, or maybe they amp them up and get them through these tough situations.
I mean, for me personally, I think it's a blast to have veteran players, experienced players be on the field and on the sideline and at practices, because it just adds like this, I guess, level of confidence. And if there's ever like uncertainty among like the younger players, like myself, for example, I know that there's always a mentor in a way, like right next to me, either on the sideline or on the field with me, that's able to guide me through. Or any of the new young players on our roster, they're just able to be like a guiding mentor for them. And it's hard not to be hype when you have veteran players that are coming back out of retirement wanting to play. And it's just amazing to see, especially like Chris De La Fuente and Luke, and we also have Carlos Prado back. It's hard not to get hyped when you see them making like big hits and big stops out on the field, and knowing like all the experience that they have, and just thinking, well, maybe someday I can get to their level.
Awesome. You probably heard us talking about kind of the big contributions that you guys have needed and gotten from some of your female chasers. This is rapidly becoming very much a very pro Alyssa Viaba podcast. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, it's still her first season overall. Is it her first year?
Yes, this is her first MLQ season, and she just started playing spring semester for UTSA.
Yeah. So under a year. Yeah. Obviously it was already a pro Malena Sosa podcast. And then I think Catherine Hay played very well. So can you guys speak to kind of what you've seen of Alyssa's growth over the year, and also playing with Catherine?
Playing with Alyssa, I mean, she's just gone above and beyond like any expectation, or I mean, she's honestly done all of that on her own through watching her own film and just being super coachable and always asking questions. And she was able to understand the game in like less than a few weeks leading up to regionals. And then you saw how well she performed at nationals. And really, that's just all up to her and her wanting to get to a level to where, people are going to know my name. And I think a lot of people definitely know her name in just under a year now. And Catherine, I mean, she was on leadership for Texas State. I mean, she's not shy to like being in command and for telling people what to do. And I mean, she really showed out this past series, and especially in terms of defensive stops. I think she had like 4 or 5 like goal stopping moments. And being on a different team than her for USQ, I wasn't able to see a lot of that growth, but I can definitely see it now, especially since Texas State like were D2 finalists. I think that she's definitely grown a lot, and I can't wait to see how both of them grow after MLQ, considering like players coming off of USQ and players coming off of MLQ. It's just like crazy growing opportunity, and I can't wait to see how both of them come out of MLQ into the next USQ season.
Awesome. So obviously it's a very young San Antonio team. San Antonio, has a lot to live up to in the fact that, I mean, this franchise has never failed to make the semifinals.
Mm-hmm.
So how are you guys kind of balancing, expectations? What are your kind of goals as a team this season?
I think our goals as a team this season is to just mesh as much as possible and get it to where everyone is able to each other. I know coming off of like veteran players and the UTSA squad and the Texas State squad, we don't usually all play together a lot. So I think one of our biggest goals is just getting to where like you don't see like a predominantly UTSA line. You will see like a mix of veteran UTSA, Texas State, and anything else that there might be. And I think another big goal for us this season is to just keep practices and keep series like as positive as possible, and to be as kind and as positive and as uplifting to each other as we can be during practice and during a series, because at the end of the day, that's what's going to keep us together, and that's what's going to keep us motivated throughout every series and every team that we might face. And obviously a big goal is to go further than semifinals this time.
For sure. Awesome. Well, Malena, thanks so much for taking the time. Congratulations on the win, and we're looking forward to watching you play all season.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
No problem. All right, so that will do it for our first edition of MLQ Replay for the 2023 season. There's a lot of awesome action to come. Next weekend, we'll have the Minneapolis Monarchs taking on the Detroit Innovators, a series I know myself and Nick are incredibly excited for. The Austin Outlaws opening their season against League City Legends, and our series of the week at 4 p.m. Eastern between the Boston Forge and the Charlotte Aviators right here in Boston. Nick and I are quite excited to not have to travel for that one. But we thank everybody for watching and for tuning in all weekend. And we hope you tune in again next week. Have a good week and best of luck next week.